The Vatican lay cloaked in a dense fog. Its ancient stones whispered secrets, whispers of centuries long gone. It was winter. Even the candles in the private chapel shivered, not from cold, but from grief warning, something the world had not yet dared to imagine. Sister Fernanda was 25, young, devoted, her olive skin pale from the cold, sleepless nights had drained her. But her faith never faltered. She wore her black habit, a simple wide apron, clean and without vanity. Her life was about service. In the apostolic palace, her name known for dedication, for unshakable composure. But this morning was different. She woke with a start, far earlier than usual. Her heart raced without cause. It wasn't a dream that had shaken her. It was the silence. A silence that pressed in too tightly, like a secret waiting to be broken. She wrapped her fingers around her rosary, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Lord, what is it you want me to see?" She dressed swiftly, her fingers trembling as she tied her apron. She didn't know why her hand shook. There was no fear, but something inside her stirred, like a bell tolling in her soul. In the hallway, Sister Lucia, the stern and aging overseer of the nuns, blocked her path, dressed in an austere black veil. The older nun's presence was like iron forged into human form. "Fernanda," she said sharply, "you've been summoned to tidy the Holy Father's personal chambers." Immediately, Fernanda's heart dropped. "No one is to disturb His Holiness today." She replied softly. Confused, Sister Lucia narrowed her eyes. "He made the request, yesterday said. It must be, you don't ask questions. Go now." The order was strange. The Pope rarely made specific requests, especially not for individual sisters, let alone for cleaning duties. But Fernanda obeyed without protest. She bowed her head and made her way down the long marble corridor. The hallways were colder than usual, and every click of her shoes echoed louder than expected. When she arrived at the Pope's private quarters, she knocked gently. No answer. Another knock. Still silence. She hesitated before opening the door. Inside the room was dimly lit. The curtains half drawn. The Pope's bed was neatly made. Untouched on the desk sat a closed Bible, a half-used candle, and a white envelope sealed with wax. Something in Fernanda's chest pulled her forward. She stepped slowly into the room, her eyes scanning the details. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal. Like a stage that had just finished its final scene, she walked toward the desk. Her fingers hovered over the envelope. It wasn't addressed. No official seal, and yet her heart thundered. She told herself she shouldn't touch it. She was a nun, not a secretary, and certainly not one meant to open papal correspondence. But something inside whispered, "It's for you." She picked it up. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax seal. The paper inside was delicate, thick and yellowed, but recently written, and the handwriting unmistakable. It was the Pope's. Her eyes began to scan the ink. "This is my final letter today. I depart not only from life, but from the silence I've carried for decades. There are things I have seen, things I have hidden, and truths that were never mine to keep to the one reading. This you were not chosen by the Church, but by a greater will, a woman of devotion with the heart of a servant and the soul of a protector. I entrust you with this truth." Fernanda's breath caught her vision. Blurred, the next era of faith will not come through doctrine, but through compassion, through a woman who dares to love like a mother and speak like a prophet. You are that voice. The Church will resist you, but the world needs you. Knees gave out, the letter slipped from her hands. Her body collapsed to the polished wooden floor. Darkness came. She didn't know how long she lay there unconscious. The room was quiet when she opened her eyes again, her cheek pressed against the cold floor. The envelope was near her hand. Her fingers curled around it like a reflex, as if her soul knew it was sacred. The tears came slowly at first. Then all at once, she sat up, dazed, clutching the letter to her chest, staring at the Pope's empty bed. He was gone. Whether dead or moved, she didn't know. But she could feel it in her bones. The man who had carried so many secrets had finally laid them down. And now he had left one with her. A secret too large for her small frame. A destiny too vast for a nun in a white apron. She whispered loud to the silence, "Why me?" There was no answer, only the faint echo of her voice and the quiet flicker of the candle. But the letter was real, and the truth could no longer be buried. Fernanda sat, frozen on the wooden floor of the Pope's chambers, the letter crumpled in her trembling hands. Her breath trembled with each inhale. The message she had read, still echoing in her mind, felt unreal. But the thick parchment and the lingering scent of old ink reminded her this was no dream. The Holy Father had written it, and he had written it for her outside the window. The morning light had shifted. The fog thinned just enough for the outline of Speter's Basilica to emerge like a ghost through the mist. But inside the air was heavier than ever. Fernanda forced herself to her feet, swaying slightly as the blood returned to her limbs. Her apron was wrinkled. A bruise formed on her elbow from the fall, but she couldn't focus on that. Now, she looked again at the Pope's bed, still untouched. He hadn't slept here last night. He had known he wouldn't. A knock at the door jolted her quickly. Instinctively, she slipped the letter into the hidden inner pocket of her habit. The door opened before she could speak. Sister Lutia stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. Her sharp features were carved with suspicion, and her dark veil seemed heavier than usual. "What took you so long?" she asked coldly. "I sent you nearly an hour ago." Fernanda opened her mouth, but her voice was caught in her throat. I fainted. Lutia's eyes narrowed. She stepped into the room, taking in the slightly rumpled bedsheets and the faint disarray of the desk. "What were you doing before that?" "I was cleaning, dusting." I felt dizzy. Lucia's eyes dropped to the floor where the candle had been knocked over her gaze, flicked to Fernand's face, as though scanning for the lie beneath her words. "Did you touch anything?" she asked slowly. Fernanda lowered her eyes, and a sister, Lucia, stepped closer. "Too close. Be careful what you say," she said quietly. "There are things in this place not meant for everyone." It was a threat, veiled in soft cloth and whispered tones. Lucia turned away without another word. But before leaving, she added, "Come to morning prayer. Do not be late." As the door closed, Fernanda's knees nearly gave again. Her body trembled with more than fear. It was something deeper. Unknowing, Lucia knew something. Maybe not the entire truth, but enough to be dangerous in the chapel. The nuns sat like shadows, and pews, their black and white habits, a sea of reverence. Latin chants floated in the air, but Fernanda couldn't focus. Her fingers traced the edges of the letter through the fabric of her pocket. She kept her head down. She didn't dare look at Lutia when the Mass ended. She remained seated long after the others had filed out, only when the final echoes of the organ faded. Did she move again? She walked not to the dormitory, but toward the gardens behind the southern wing, where no one ever went this early. There, behind a cypress tree, she read the letter again. "The church is not made of marble or robes," the Pope had written. "It is made of people, of mothers and laborers, of children, and the poor. It must no longer fear the feminine voice. It must no longer silence." Tears stung her eyes again. She remembered the Pope's face. The last time she had seen him only days ago in the courtyard, he was seated in a wheelchair, sunlight warming his pale skin. He had looked at her directly, smiled gently, and murmured, "The greatest truths are the ones we hide the longest." She hadn't understood then, now she did. He had been saying goodbye later. That day the Vatican buzzed with quiet alarm. Rumors of the Pope's condition spread among the staff, like smoke under a door. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. He was gone, but the official word had not come. It wasn't until sundown that the bell told a deep, mournful sound rolled across the rooftops of Rome. 12 slow chimes. The Pope was dead. Sister Fernanda felt her chest tighten. She pressed her back to the stone wall near the kitchen and let herself cry. For the first time in years, he had written her just before he died. It was too much, too strange, too divine to be coincidence. And now she was holding something no one else had seen. Something the church may not want seen. At all that night, the halls were quieter than usual. Too quiet. She passed Sister Lucia once. Just after Vespers, the older nun gave her a long, unreadable look, and Fernanda noticed something she hadn't. Before Lucia was holding an envelope too almost identical to hers. Her breath caught in her throat. Had he written more than one letter? Had he left others with pieces of the same truth? She rushed to her room and shut the door behind her. She locked it. Then she knelt beside her bed, pulled out the letter, and stared at it again. A knock sounded. Not at her door, but faint, echoing from down the corridor. Then another 3 in total, evenly spaced, a signal. She extinguished her lamp and backed against the far wall. Hard hammering, someone knew someone was coming, and this was only the beginning. The knock had stopped, but the echo remained. Sister Fernanda sat frozen in her tiny room, back pressed against the cold stone wall. Her breath shallow and ragged. Her fingertips trembled as they gripped the folds of her habit near her chest, where the letter still lay, protected but vulnerable. The corridor outside her door was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that didn't bring peace but warning. A shiver ran down her spine like ice water. It started at the nape of her neck and slithered downward, coiling in her gut. Then came a sound, software, deliberate. A footstep. Someone had stepped just close enough for the floorboard to creak, but not close enough to be seen. Under the doorframe, she crawled to her knees, heart pounding in her ears. Every instinct screamed, "Hide the letter." But there was nowhere left to hide it. That felt safe. Not in the mattress, not in the drawer. She looked up, then spotted it, the small hollow behind the crucifix above her bed. Shakily, she reached up, slipped the folded parchment into the cavity behind Christ's carved figure, and whispered a prayer. The door knob turned just once. Firm, silent testing. She clamped a hand over her mouth, then after a long pause, the step retreated 2 paces, maybe 3, then nothing. Whoever it was, they didn't knock again. They didn't speak. They simply left, or waited. She didn't sleep that night at dawn. The bells rang out again. This time, announcing a public mourning period, the Vatican prepared for what would become global headlines. The death of Pope Benedictus IV. Black banners were being hung. Journalists, barred. Cardinals, summoned, and through it all, Fernanda walked the marble halls like a shadow. No one noticed the young nun with tired eyes and a stiff jaw. No one saw the way her fingers tightened every time she heard the word legacy. Or no one saw how she flinched when Sister Lucia passed by her without a word, but left a folded napkin on the table near the chapel door. A folded napkin with a single word written inside. Beware. Fernanda crushed it in her palm and kept walking later that morning. While helping arrange flowers for the Pope's upcoming funeral service, she saw something that made her knees lock. Cardinal Moretti, one of the oldest and most powerful voices in the Vatican, an advisor who rarely showed his face outside the Curia, a man known for his cold logic and rigid loyalty to tradition. He stood beneath the stained glass depiction of St. Peter, flanked by two aides. His sharp, silver eyes scanned the chapel, lingering briefly, intentionally on her. Not long after a whisper reached her through Sister Agnes, an older nun, with poor vision and kind of lips. "He's asking about some letter," Agnes said. "They say something was left behind. Something the Pope wrote, and someone's hiding it." Fernando's skin went cold. "They believe it contains dangerous ideas," Agnes added with hesitation. "Reform, even heresy." Fernanda felt like the floor was tilting beneath her feet. Her breath came short. Her hands shook so violently that she knocked over a vase of lees. She fell to her knees trying to pick them up. But in truth, she just needed to stay there. Just breathe. Just pray. But her prayer was shattered by the sound of her name. Sister Fernanda. She turned. It was Cardinal Moretti himself. His expression unreadable. His tone, "Flat walk with me." They strolled through the Vatican gardens in silence for several minutes. His hands were clasped behind his back. Hers were shaking by her sides. "His Holiness left many things unfinished," he said at last. "Letters, thoughts, speculations." She said nothing. He continued, "Some are best left buried." Her heart pounded. "You were seen in his chambers," he added, without turning to her. "You fainted?" She stopped walking. "Yes, I was overwhelmed." "A common reaction," he said. But his eyes turned toward her again. Sharper now. "You didn't find anything unusual?" "No." "Your Eminence." She lied, her voice barely steady. "Good," he said, smiling faintly. "We wouldn't want confusion to cloud this holy transition. The Church must remain untouched." He turned and left. Fernandanda stood frozen, untouched. Was that what this was about? A truth so threatening that even the memory of it must be erased. She returned to her cell that night and retrieved the letter. Her fingers lingered on the words again. She read the lines over and over, absorbing them into her soul. Not just the message, but the responsibility. "You are that voice." The Pope had seen something in her, not rank, not power, but heart. And now her heart was screaming at her to run, but her conscience said, "Stand." Then came another sound, a soft tap, a whisper outside her door. "You are not safe." She opened the door slowly. No one there, just a small white card, blank except for a single inked mark, a red cross drawn through the papal crest, a symbol of silencing, of eraser, of execution. Fernanda backed into her cell, clutching the letter like it was part of her body. Now she stared at the flickering candlelight and whispered, "What do you want me to do, Holy Father? I'm no one." Then she looked to the crucifix, and the silence answered, "You are someone to me." The Vatican slept, but Sister Fernanda did not. The red cross etched into the card haunted her, its meaning unmistakable. The Church had enemies of truth, and they were watching her. Silencing her wasn't just an option. It was an intent. She sat in her darkened cell, the candle-burning glow. The Pope's letter lay before her, creased from how many times she had unfolded it. Read. It folded it again. Every word was etched into her mind, pulsing with an urgency that now felt almost divine. You were that voice. She wasn't brave. She wasn't powerful. She was a 25-year-old nun in a white apron with no allies, no title, and no future. If she defied those above her, but she had his trust, and something about that made the fear feel smaller. She dressed before dawn, pulling her veil tight around her head. Her breath was visible in the morning chill as she left her cell. Every hallway in the Vatican felt like it held its breath as she walked them alone, but no longer uncertain. She had made her decision. The Pope's funeral was to be held in St. Peter's Square. By noon, already preparations had begun. Cardinals arrived in rows of black sedans. Journalists were kept behind gates. Nuns worked quietly to polish the silver and lay the ceremonial cloth across the altar. Fernanda avoided them all. She moved with precision toward the library wing, silent and deserted during Mass. She knew its narrow corridors, well tucked behind shelves of leather-bound scrolls, was an unused study chamber. The Pope had once written there in his early years. Before age made him retreat to his private chambers, she entered and bolted the door from inside her robe. She pulled out a small envelope, plain sealed with fresh wax. Inside was a copy of the Pope's letter, transcribed carefully by hand. The night before, the original remained hidden in her room, tucked behind the crucifix. This copy would go to someone who still had a voice, a man who once studied under Benedictus IV, who had preached compassion over tradition, who had been exiled to Argentina years ago for his radical thoughts. But Fernando remembered him from her noviciate days. Cardinal Thomas. She didn't know if he was still in Rome. She only knew he had to be. As the bells tolled noon, she stepped into the light of the Basilica Plaza. Her heart pounded beneath her habit, around her black clad. Clergy murmured prayers, foreign dignitaries stood in silence. Choirs sang, and then she saw him. Cardinal Thomas, older. Now, white, bearded, and walking slowly but unmistakably. Him alone. No aids, no protection. She gripped the envelope, tight, step by step. She made her way through the crowd. Every movement felt like a weight being lifted from the earth. But just as she reached him, a hand grabbed her arm hard. She turned to Sister Lutia, her face calm, eyes furious. "You will not embarrass this church," she hissed. Fernanda froze. "I don't want to hurt you," Lutia added. "But if you speak, you'll never speak again." She was cornered. "Then a voice is something wrong, sisters?" Cardinal Thomas stood behind Lutia, his cane firm on the cobblestone. Lutia turned, startled. "No, Your Eminence," she said. Hiding her fury, Fernanda didn't wait. She stepped forward, placed the envelope into Tomas's hands and whispered, "Please, it's from him." His last words, "Don't let them bury it." Lutia's eyes went wide with horror. Tomas looked down, felt the seal. His face changed. Confusion turned to gravity. "He nodded, let's go," he said softly to Fernanda. She turned and vanished into the crowd before Lucia could react. That night, the Vatican was quiet, but not with peace. With fear, something had shifted. Word spread slowly. A letter had surfaced, a message from the late Pope one that suggested reform confession and a challenge to centuries of silence. Some called it heresy. Others called it prophecy. But none could ignore it. Days passed, then weeks. Fernand's letter to Thomas made its way into the hands of others. He read it aloud during a private service for Vatican staff, invoking the Pope's wishes the Vatican tried to dismiss. It called it forged a fabrication, but they couldn't prove it, because they didn't have the original. And no matter how hard they searched Fernanda's room, they never found it, because it remained quietly behind a crucifix, guarded by the same silence that once hid it. Lucia was removed from her post, quietly transferred to a convent in northern Spain. No charges, no trial, just silence. And Fernanda, she was relocated too, but not as punishment. One morning, a letter arrived with the Vatican seal. She was to be stationed in Brazil in a small parish, where reform and compassion were being quietly encouraged by Cardinal Thomas, a place where her voice might grow. She left without fanfare. She said goodbye to the stone halls, to the chapel, where the candlelight flickered like prophecy, and to the Pope's old chambers, now sealed, waiting for another soul brave enough to open them again. Years passed. Fernanda stood in the parish garden in Rio. Her habit faded from the sun, the cross around her neck, simple yet eternal. She gazed at the young girls before her. One asked, "Sister, is it true the Pope wrote you a letter?" Fernanda smiled softly. Words weren't needed. Her eyes lifted to the sky. She whispered a prayer of gratitude. The world had shifted, not because of power, but because someone believed in a girl in a white apron. Someone trusted her to carry the truth, and she did. The truth found its voice, and that voice changed everything forever. If you felt the emotions in this story, smash that like button. Hit subscribe for more heart-tugging tales. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Stay kind, stay curious, keep watching. The next story could change everything.